In this episode, I interview Nicole Bijlsma, who's an expert on building biology and healthy homes. Building biology is a science that investigates the health hazards in the built environment. This can be anything from chemicals in building materials, noxious gases, house dust mites, allergens, mold, electromagnetic fields, drinking water contaminants, geopathic stress, and much more. Nicole is a former naturopath and acupuncturist with 15 years of clinical experience, a building biologist, and the author of the best-selling book, which I own a copy of, Healthy Home, Healthy Family. She has lectured extensively at medical conferences both in Australia and internationally, and is regularly consulted by the media for her opinion on chemicals, mold, and electromagnetic fields. She is currently undertaking her PhD developing a tool to rate the health of homes. She's also the founder and principal of the Australian College of Environmental Studies, which offers a number of courses including building biology, mold testing, and EMF testing. In this episode, we discuss quite a few different topics. What is building biology? Nicole's journey to building biology, common problems with modern homes, so EMF is obviously a major one, VOCs, plastics, toxic chemicals in some cleaning products, and how to resolve some of these issues. We also do kind of a deep dive into the building biology guidelines and discuss each aspect that would be assessed in a home visit. So if you want to look at that sheet while you're listening to that part of the interview, then just Google, I'll include the link in the description, but you can Google Building Biology Evaluation Guidelines, SBM 2015. And so we also cover some actionable tips for the audience and finish off with some questions from my Instagram audience. I really enjoyed speaking with Nicole, and I'm sure you'll get some value out of this episode. Hello, Nicole, and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to talking.
Cool. So I thought we could get started with how you first got into building biology. What happened in your life which spurred you in this direction?
Sure. Two events happened in my life that changed the way I practiced. I was working as a naturopath and acupuncturist for 15 years, and I noticed really strong correlations between many of my patients' illnesses with chronic fatigue syndrome and mold, but also sleep disturbances and electromagnetic fields. But it wasn't until my husband and I moved into our home, our first home we bought in Warrandyte, which is a really bushy area in Melbourne, that we developed insomnia. We didn't sleep very well there, and I subsequently had 10 miscarriages in this house, and no one was able to identify why I was miscarrying despite going to the recurrent miscarriage clinic, looking at IVF, all of those sort of things. They just couldn't figure it out. So I really looked at the fact that our house, since we moved into this lovely home on half an acre next to the river, that our health declined, especially our sleep, and we noticed we were sleeping near the meter panel. And when I got a Gauss meter, I realised we're sleeping in a high electromagnetic field. We were also sleeping above geopathic stress. There was a watercourse and fault line under the bed, and there was a wasp nest in close proximity just outside of our bedroom as another sign of geopathic stress. And the council used to come and spray our property with pesticides, and of course we were living near a T intersection, so we had high levels of traffic-related air pollutants which would come up through our bedroom, through the garage, up through our timber boards into our bedroom, and take 2 hours to dissipate once I started testing all the carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, etc. It was quite an eye-opener, and yet you walked into the house, it was like a B&B, it was lovely, but there was something really wrong with it, and our health declined since then. So as a result of that, I started to research the impact of hazards in the home on human health, starting with indoor air quality and electromagnetic fields, and I was shocked at how much data was available even 20 years ago. and why I hadn't learned any of this in my double degree as a naturopath and acupuncturist.
Yeah, all right. And so while that was all going on, you were looking at all these other normal or more normal treatments, but none of them were obviously fixing the issue because it was in the home.
That's exactly right. So, as an acupuncturist with a Chinese medical degree and a naturopath, I mean, that's 8 years at university, we didn't cover the environment. We still don't cover the environment very well in these modalities, let alone orthodox medicine. So it really surprised me when I started to look at the data that there was so much data. And we spend most of our time in the built environment, and yet we completely ignore it as a root cause of illness. I would argue most illnesses, especially autoimmune disorders, a lot of your chronic illnesses, neurodegenerative disorders like Parkinson's, dementia, Alzheimer's, attention deficit hyperactivity disorders, many of the mental illnesses I see with mold is just staggering. It's just, I would say many chronic illnesses are either exacerbated by or caused by things in your house, because that's where you spend most of your time.
Yeah, it's like you mentioned, it's not really even talked about much in the quote-unquote natural health or alternative health area, and it's not talked about pretty much at all in the orthodox medical area. And, that is really sad because, like you say, it's causing a lot of problems, and that's sort of one of the reasons why I'm doing episodes like this, to try to get the word out. You mentioned in there that it can affect, for example, children with ADHD and things like that. Is that the EMF component? Because I've read studies on that, or is it more the chemical or the both?
Both. I think the impact of electromagnetic fields, from my experience anecdotally dealing with patients with these chemicals, with these chronic fatigue-like symptoms, is they have a mixture of both chemical exposures, especially pesticides, which is the worst of all of them because they're antibacterial, which means they're anti-human because you're mainly bacteria. And EMF appears to potentiate the impact of mold and chemicals in the body by enhancing the permeability of the blood-brain barrier and suppressing melatonin, which is, of course, your most important anti-cancer hormone, and, of course, through oxidative stress and inflammation. So you have this synergistic effect between electromagnetic field exposures, chemicals, and mold. And that's what I see when I'm dealing with these patients with tricky chronic illnesses whose the doctors can't help, is that they have this synergistic effect of all of these three parameters, which you identify with a comprehensive exposure history, and you have to reduce your exposure to chemicals, electromagnetic fields, and mold.
Yeah, it's like you say, it's the combination, and due to the kind of compartmentalization of modern medicine, the people in the different areas are not talking on the same wavelength. They're not looking at the issue together. It's always separate. And I think I've even read a post somewhere about I think it was mold increasing or growing and being benefited by Wi-Fi or EMF. Have you heard about that?
There's not a lot of data on that. I know Klinghardt in the US, the doctor there, talks a bit about it, but there's actually not a lot of data on it. It's very there needs to be more research on it for sure. We don't know. We certainly know the sun, which is an electromagnetic field, has important consequences on bacterial and microbial growth and human life and all of these things. So I'm sure there is a connection, but what impact it has specifically hasn't really been elucidated. So it's hard. There's certainly a lot of other mechanisms by which you can affect human health without going into that stream. But I haven't seen enough data to show conclusively the mechanism. Whether it increases proliferation of bacterial growth, I don't know.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, best not to make claims we can't really back up and things. But so you were on this, you're checking the home. Did you just go out and buy EMF meters and get the air tested, mold testing done in the home, or what was the process?
It was a very long and arduous process, especially starting with indoor air quality, like years and years of just reading, ultimately writing the book, establishing the college, getting it accredited through the government, and, of course, teaching for the last 21 years. It's been a very long, arduous process. So, over time, I just got meters and started with a Gauss meter for magnetic field from the meter panel going, during the middle of the night when the hot water service kicks in, you're exposed to high levels of magnetic fields emanating from a meter panel, which we're sleeping on the other side of. So that wasn't good. And of course, that was a real problem. So I just got more and more meters and went all over the world to study as much as I could on best practice, like which countries were doing which on best practice in relation to AC magnetic fields, where the Swedish were the strictest when it came to wireless technology and radio frequencies, which is the radiation emitted from wireless technologies. The Russians had the strictest standards, and really looking at everything from noxious gases to chemical exposures to mold. The US have a good understanding of mold and the impact of a water damaged building on human health and how to assess and remediate that. So I really looked around the world to see who has best practice in terms of exposure standards and implementing the precautionary principle, and how can I implement that in the advanced diploma of building biology, which is what I primarily do is run the college and train people to become building biologists.
Yeah, and you mentioned in there the meter panel. You're referring to the electromechanical, the old style smart meters, or something different?
At the time, it was the old meter panel because we didn't have smart meters when I was miscarrying, years and years ago.
Yeah.
But now, of course, the smart meter is worse because it's not just AC magnetic fields, it's emitting.
Yeah.
It's also emitting radio frequencies, whole lot of dirty power as well, and of course the AC electric field.
And you mentioned something a wee bit interesting before about the wasp's nest as a sign for geopathic stress. How does that work?
Yes, so basically the Aboriginals had a very good understanding of the energetics of the land and which areas to avoid. A good example was around Ayers Uluru and Ayers Rock. They avoided parts of it because they acknowledged and observed that the mammals would not go in that area, that the type of plants growing there were very different to the plants that they would eat. So later we discovered it's high levels of uranium, So this is part of our understanding of what we refer to as sacred space and geopathic stress. Geopathic stress is really the way in which there are stressors within the earth that can emit frequencies that can affect health, both from an animal and a human perspective. So the stressors in the land would be things like curry grids as a result of man-made activity, mining and building and construction where they're building into the ground, to things like underground watercourses, which can be many different types, both positive and not so positive, depending on the contamination and pollution, to things like geomagnetic lines, ley lines, and things like this, fault lines, for example. So it has this, what we call this piezoelectric effect, where the pressure between the rocks is creating a frequency that's coming up through the earth. And if you're building above this, you're actually absorbing it, especially if you spend time above it. So with everything in building biology, it's all about what are the hazards in the home, but more importantly, what's the risk of exposure? So we know with asbestos, for example, that it can kill you, lung cancer, asbestosis, mesothelioma. However, the risk is low if you don't disturb it. If it stays in the board and it's not disturbed and becomes friable, then there's no risk. Yeah, it can kill you, but if you don't disturb it, it doesn't become a dust, it's not going to be a health hazard. It's the same with everything, geopathic stress, electromagnetic fields. It's about, here is a hazard, but what is the risk of exposure? And the risk is often if you're spending time near or around that hazard. So for electromagnetic fields and geopathic stress, is your bed located above these geopathic stressors, or do you have routers and wireless devices in your bedroom that will be suppressing melatonin, lighting that's emitting blue light that again suppresses melatonin, that over a long period of time may impact your health? So that's really important to bring both of those together when we're assessing the potential of a hazard to affect human health.
Yeah. And would another, I think I've read online somewhere that with the geopathic stress, so it's sort of like, in some parts of the world, obviously, like you mentioned, where there's mines, so there's specific types of elements, minerals under the ground in an area, and then that specific, what that ground is composed of, reacting, or how it is influenced by the Earth's magnetic field, creates something new, which could be, like you said, beneficial or bad. Is that another way of looking at it?
Yeah, so we would measure that. If we're measuring radioactive nuclides, we use a Geiger counter, which is different to
Mm-hmm.
any other device because you're picking up, minerals and radioactive minerals higher up the electromagnetic spectrum, so use different instruments for that. But there are areas, if you look at the radon map and radiometric map from Geoscience
Right.
Australia,
Okay, and
you
so
can see
eventually
where
did
the
you
radioactive
just
areas are across
obviously
the whole
move
continent.
home
And
to resolve the issue?
very radioactive areas across Australia that if you live above them, as many people do, their incidence of lung cancer skyrockets. Yeah. Can you hear me? We moved to another bedroom. I just got
Okay.
nice to move to another bedroom and get away from the traffic light air pollutants, from the meter panel magnetic field, and the geopathic stress. And then I fell pregnant naturally with twins.
Oh, okay. Sort of worked out. Okay, so let's go through some common problems that people have in their homes. We've talked a little bit about EMF already. What about the sort of chemical exposure side of things? Which are the most common issues? It probably depends on the country and the building materials, but from your experience?
The main one will be your toxic load in general. And as I said, pesticides will be the big one. I'm always surprised people who are relatively health conscious and they may even be buying organic food, but they're quite happy to buy 5 bottles of Mortein spray and chase one fly around the house. Like, when you take a history as opposed to be in their house, you see it from a very different perspective because they don't always tell you the whole story or they don't connect that those chemicals are incredibly toxic. So that's why I think house visits are so important for clinicians to undertake because then they see there's no, they see how the client lives and spends most of their time. So pesticides is a big one. I always ask about pest management. Is there any pests in the house? The pests also tell me things like termites, that there's likely to be moisture issues and therefore mold. So I'm always looking at that and ask about cockroaches and rodents and how they deal with that as to how we can reduce their exposure, make sure they're not using any toxic pesticides. The other ones, of course, are cleaning products. A lot of people think that to have a healthy house, it has to be full of ammonia and bleach, which is actually the opposite to what a healthy home is. A healthy home has a diverse range of bacteria in the household dust to stimulate a healthy immune response. Bringing in a whole lot of chemicals, antibacterial chemicals, is actually the worst thing you can do, especially if you have children. So it's very important that you focus on reducing the dust load in the house because that's where all the chemicals tend to reside, from your air fresheners and your perfumes and your aftershaves to your solvents and your cleaning products and your formaldehydes and your pesticides you've tracked on your shoes and your flame retardants from the furnishings. So how you deal with dust in the house is critical. That's why you should use a slightly damp microfiber cloth to reduce the chemical load and the dust load in the house. And of course, a good vacuum cleaner fitted with a HEPA filter and a motorized head. My husband and I created the cleaning product range called Abode for people with chemical and skin sensitivities. And that was specifically designed because there really wasn't anything on the market that people could use that actually wash their dishes or clean their clothes without causing adverse health effects. And for us, the key success to our business was using food grade ingredients, not organic. Organic is a term you don't use for cleaning products because most of the ingredients don't come from plants. So organic is an irrelevant term when it comes to cleaning. You want food grade as opposed to industrial grade ingredients because most of it's mined from the ground where you have your impurities and metals and radioactive nucleotides, etc. So when it comes
That's
to
a great way of putting it. Like if it's safe for food or safe to be on the skin, food grade, then obviously we don't have to worry about it.
Exactly right. And look, we get amazing testimonials from farmers on remote stations throughout Queensland and other states who can use our laundry powder or laundry liquid, and the water coming out of the grey water coming out of their washing machine is almost potable. They can put it on their farms because we only use food grade ingredients. So it's something a lot of the inspectors going, what are you using? You can use this water coming out of your washing machine because it's food grade.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and it's also important for sustainability. And it's sort of a buzzword, but seriously, sustainability going forward. homes shouldn't be flushing and having all that water going off the property. It should be kind of recycled into the garden some way. And obviously most people can't do that because the ingredients they're adding to the water are toxic, and then you'd be putting that toxic stuff into your garden.
Absolutely, definitely. And this is the thing. People go to products like Earth Choice or Earth, where it's good for the earth. It's rubbish for the earth. You actually look at the amount of salt content in there, and it's actually misinformation that is not good for the marine wildlife because of the surfactants that are used. And it's certainly not good for the earth, let alone their health. People assume if it's green washed, that it's good for their health. And in fact, the opposite is true. There are very few products, if any, on the market for cleaning that are actually based on health as opposed to just cleaning. And that's why it took us so long to get this range onto the marketplace, because the ingredients that are sold for your toll manufacturers that sell 95% of all the stuff in the supermarket, it's just rubbish. We end up having to sell our house and import the whole lot.
That's a really good point. And I'm interested to know what the ingredients sort of that you use are, because I haven't bought any of those products, but they sound good. But I've just used in the past like apple cider vinegar, lemon juice, maybe like some sort of lavender spray or something like that. I've sort of no idea what I'm doing, but they seem more natural than the other products. But what do you actually use to make yours?
Well, it's a difference depending on what the product is. So with our dish liquids, we'll have things like alkyl polyglucosides, which is the surfactant. And that's the main thing. You want a surfactant or a detergent that emulsifies the fat. Because if this is the thing, lemon juice, vinegar, bicarb, they're not detergents, so they actually don't clean. Bicarb can be used as an abrasive, but unless you add it to dish liquid, it's actually not that effective at getting rid of soap scum and things like that. So what's important is using a surfactant that that is effective for a start. Otherwise, there's no point using the product at all. But it's also gentle, so it's not going to be a skin irritant, which, of course, many people's skin problems, especially on their hands, are often due to the cleaning products they're using.
Yeah. And so you mentioned also dealing with insects and people using all sorts of crazy toxic chemicals for that. I generally, if it's grabbable, just put it outside, but sometimes end up just squashing them, but which, it's not ideal. But what do you use?
Well, fly screens on my windows for a start are a good start. Good housekeeping. If there's smells,
Yeah.
they're going to want to come in. So that's the key, is you actually have to clean the dishes up or pack in the dishwasher and keep the smells away, because they're attracted to your house for shelter, water, and food. So if you deal with those three, then you don't have a problem. And that's the thing.
Do you think there's also like a location component? I mean, like when I was in Australia, I think ants, but also cockroaches were like a consistent issue. I mean, like, is there a way? Are they just there in some parts of the world, and you've got to, like, even if you do all those things right, they're still going to pop up? Or
Well, look, I think if you deal with, that they can't get access to the house, because a lot of people have a very leaky house, or there's holes, or tradies come in and suddenly there's a hole entry that mice can get in. Do you know what I mean? Like the issue for us was we had a rodent's nest out the back near the compost, because compost is where the food is. So that's an issue. So the compost bin needs to be significantly away from the home to prevent rodents from wanting to come in. But the reason why the rodents were so prolific actually was because my dog's not motivated by food. So his dried food sits there for God knows how long. And the magpies came, as you could hear through the audio, and the rodents eat his food. And that was a big problem. So for us, it was, okay, if he's not going to eat it within 15 minutes, put a plate on top or take it away. And that made a huge difference to not attracting the rodents in our home in the first place.
Yeah, it's like
holes with steel wool, making sure they can't get in, actually having a thorough inspection of your house to going, how could they actually get in to your house, and doing that. And of course, fly screens on the windows and having good housekeeping where they can't smell food and want to come in the first place.
Yeah, it's definitely like with a lot of things, mainstream versus natural health approaches, it's more just like intelligent prevention, being organized, setting things up, as opposed to like band-aid solutions, which is like the sprays and all that. I think for rodents, like everyone, I mean, maybe not everyone, but like the cat is just the best solution there, cat?
Absolutely, definitely. Cats are amazing because they're rodents, exactly. So look at what nature does to deal with that.
Hmm.
It's not rocket science. It's not
Yeah,
rocket
all right.
science. It's really
And so there
medicine.
was, you mentioned so we went through the toxic chemicals that people use to clean and things like that. VOC paint, is that a big issue
It's
in
got
your view?
better. I really think they've got on top of a lot of the VOC issues that were present with paint in the past. Occasionally, we have problems with sealing paints where they've put fungicides in it and they're reacting badly, and now they can't live in them. It doesn't happen very often, but the VOC, I really feel like the companies have got onto a lot of the VOC. So a lot of your low VOCs are pretty good. I mean, you still take time. It's the semi-volatiles actually, rather than just the volatiles, that cause most of the problems. And they're mainly things like your polyurethane floor finishes that take years to outgas. So that's where you'd use linseed tongue oil, use your things like your Levos paints and your natural paints and oils, which are far better than using a polyurethane plastic coating, which takes years to outgas. So avoid semi-volatiles. And I really feel, though, in the last 3 to 5 years, they're much better paints available, and a lot of the painters are a lot more aware of paints that will reduce the exposures to VOCs. And within 48 hours, you find a lot of these homes, they don't even smell after they've been painted if they know what they're doing and they're using the right products.
Yeah, because we obviously had healthy paints in the past.
Yeah, and we still do, but I think because of the issue of VOCs, a lot of the painters are a lot more aware of it, and the manufacturers have got a lot better in terms of being mindful about the issues of VOC. So there's a lot more products on the market now than there were certainly 15 years ago, a lot, that is far better at reducing exposure. But if you're going to paint your house, I'd say do it on the time when it's relatively dry and hot, so it dries out quickly, it cures quicker, and have air filters. So I have my air filter going on when we recently painted the home with a carbon filter and HEPA filter in the room where the painting was, and that made quite a big difference.
What's the type of filter that obviously it depends a lot on the situation, how bad things are, but what's the type or one of the types that you like?
Well, it's a HEPA filter with a carbon filter in it. So the carbon is what gets rid of the chemicals, and the HEPA filter gets rid of the particles. So I use Innovair. That's pretty good. Climate's not too bad. But just a good HEPA filter with a built-in carbon filter. It's the carbon that will get rid of those VOCs. And the bigger the filter, the more effective it is. It depends on the motor, of course, and its capture zone. So that's the sort of thing you need to look at. But there's some good filters out there for sure.
Yeah, there are. I actually the podcast before this one was with a Hypo Air company in the US. Got one of their filters, but okay. So VOCs. Another one is mold. That's a massive issue, right?
Huge. That's probably the biggest part of our work, without doubt. Mold, I think, is the key to many of the clients I see who have chronic fatigue syndrome. MS, I see a few women with MS that I think it's not MS, it's mold. And it causes chronic inflammation that can knock out so many vital organs and systems that they end up with these chronic systemic multi-organ system failures across the whole body. And most doctors and therapists have no idea how to diagnose it or even know what to look for in terms of their biomarkers. So for me, I always ask clients, is there any visible mold or damp, musty odor in the home? Because that's a trigger already that's strongly associated with adverse health outcomes. And I often find that their symptoms, especially with fatigue, began when there was a water event or when they moved into a home that they weren't aware was water damaged. And it causes horrible illnesses and eventually mental illnesses like anxiety, depression, and even psychosis or mold rage, especially in kids. Like, I'm shocked at how often I'm seeing kids under 10 diagnosed with psychiatric problems who don't appear to be in abusive relationships, but they're in a very moldy house where they're inhaling all these toxins and it's affecting their brain and neurological function. Like, something has to be done. This is really bad.
Yeah, it's definitely a massive issue, and it makes me sort of, you have to worry now about home positioning because, with I think there's been flooding in New Zealand, flooding in Australia, and different parts of the world, obviously, and homes after that when it's not too bad that the home is completely destroyed, people end up going back into it. Are those often associated with a mold issue if they don't recuperate or fix it correctly?
Absolutely, and fixing it correctly is actually really challenging, especially if they've got chronic fatigue. Very few people with chronic fatigue can move back into a house, even if it's been properly remediated, because the remediation process stirs up all the fungal particulate, which sort of exacerbates the problem temporarily. And it's very difficult. Once you've got moisture on a surface for more than 48 hours, you've got microbes starting to produce chemicals to kill each other off to take over that space. And if you're in the way, because you're inhaling all of those endotoxins, mycotoxins, and microbial VOCs, then, over time you're going to get sick. If you're healthy, you'll get recurrent colds and flus and pneumonia, worst case scenario. If you've got a gene profile that you're susceptible to that, you'll end up with the chronic fatigue and mental illness like anxiety, depression, and fibromyalgia. So it's just horrible, horrible, horrible. You want to get someone in to test that like a building biologist as fast as possible.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned, obviously it seems, I think for the average person, it would seem more easy to understand that these toxins are going to affect the brain. But you mentioned fibromyalgia, so it's actually going to get into the muscle, the bone, connective tissue, and mess that up as well, which is quite unfortunate.
Yeah, well, and the way it does it knocks out key neuropeptides in the brain that govern endorphin release and pain. So the ability to deal with pain is significantly reduced, so they have this pain throughout the body. The inflammation creates high levels of oxidative stress, and it restricts blood flow because of the inflammation in the capillaries as well to the periphery, so to their hands and feet. So they end up getting these poor circulation. They can get postural orthostatic tachycardia, so they get dizziness and fainting can happen. But it's as a result of the inflammation in the capillaries, they get these muscle aches and pains in the muscles because there's oxygen deprivation. And this is because the key neuropeptides like melanocyte stimulating hormone, vasoactive intestinal polypeptide increases permeability of the gut. So they start developing gluten intolerance when they they don't have celiac, but now they've got gut problems because the permeability of the gut has increased and they're absorbing proteins instead of amino acids, and now they've got autoimmune disorders. It's like in the same time they start getting infections all over their body, from staph in the upper respiratory tract and nose to yeast infections and candida in the vaginal flora and the gut. And there's uncontrolled infections all over the body, and it just exacerbates this inflammation, which makes the chronic fatigue worse and worse. And eventually the neurological deficits become permanent. So the sooner they can get out of that water-damaged environment or remediate, the better they will be and the better chance of getting back to what was normal for them.
Yeah, that was a good point you mentioned about the gluten issue, because I do know someone who developed that. They haven't listened to what I've told them, but that all happened to them, their gluten sensitivity, when they moved somewhere, and which I think probably was worse. It had problems with the home from where they were before, and they've now gone down this whole gluten spiral, and they're removing all these things from their diet, but they haven't put that piece in that it could be environmental.
Absolutely.
And is there anything so is it different for these chemicals in the home? Is there different effects male versus female at all?
Well, we know females are far more likely to have chemical sensitivities, but
Oh, okay.
with something like hormone disrupting chemicals, boys seem to be far more sensitive, especially in utero. And autism, of course, is 4 times more common in boys than females. And the toxicants that keep coming up are pesticides and hormone disruptors. So it depends during their critical windows of development, like in utero, pre-puberty, all that stuff, that boys seem to be very sensitive to those hormone disruptors. Girls too, but boys especially. But chemical sensitivity in general seems to be that because women distribute their fat differently, they're holding potentially more toxicants in the system. And in fact, we suspect that the reason why infants have become more obese with each generation before they even eat food, this is while they're being breastfed or bottle fed, is it could be a protective mechanism by the body to shunt those chemicals into the fat away from the vital organs.
That's interesting.
Mm.
And so, okay. And so is there asbestos? You obviously, I think you mentioned that earlier on in the introduction. Is that more just an issue for, if you go and, I mean, I think it shouldn't be in the home in the first place, but it's less of an issue if you don't disturb it. Is that fair to say?
Sorry, if you don't disturb, what was that?
The asbestos, like that's in the
Absolutely.
building.
Yeah. So asbestos is not an issue, providing it's not disturbed. So if you're thinking about renovating and that has to be disturbed, obviously you would not be in the house and you'd need to make sure it was done by a licensed asbestos removalist to make sure that they do it in a way that they don't contaminate the rest of that property with asbestos fibres. So it needs to be done properly.
And that obviously bring in some high-level filter while they're doing all the work.
Vacuuming, filtering, containment, all of those things, double bag, all those things, yep.
Okay. Another topic I've actually seen you on your YouTube, I think I haven't watched the video, but I saw the caption for it was you were explaining on Australian TV about female women's skincare, I think lipstick and those sorts of issues. And some people have asked me, like, what do you think? And I actually don't obviously know a lot about that being a guy, but I just say, choose, an organic one or the most natural one you can find. But what would actually be some better specific advice for one, what the problems are with those sorts of products, the mainstream ones, and some replacement healthier options?
Well, your best option is not to put it on your face. I mean, because it's a toxic load. It doesn't matter how natural it is. Natural, What's natural? Asbestos is natural. It's naturally found in the ground. Uranium is natural. Petrochemicals are natural. Plastics are natural, derived from everything is derived from the planet. So let's face it, natural is a ridiculous term because it's used and abused. So natural makeup, it's just ridiculous because a lot of the makeup, especially the dyes that you find in the mica oxide, often contain lead. So just having that dye, a natural dye, means you're going to expose yourself to high lead. So you don't want that on your lips. If you're going to put tinted lipstick on your lips for your wedding and twice a year you go out, fair enough. But it's a load. If you're doing it every day, that's a problem. That's like 3 kilos a year. Don't do that. So it's about, and this is what I'm writing my next book on, is get that shit off your face, because it doesn't matter whether it's natural or not. Natural is a misused term, that these pigments are from the ground and they have high levels of lead, and it's been shown time and time again in the research. So I would say don't put crap on your body that you don't need to put on unless it's still in its natural state. You look at the women in the Polynesia, for example, where they're just using seed and nut oils and coconut oil and, all these exotic oils from their local fauna and flora, where it's just still in its natural state. It's not adulterated, it's not man-made, it's not manufactured and altered. It's still just coconut oil. So, for me, I just use mascara and I get it off with a cotton tip in coconut oil. That's it. So, the mascara, try not to get in my eyes, obviously, and it is a risk, but it's on my eyelashes and I don't put anything on my face. So that's my makeup routine for, I don't even wash my face with cleansers, and the only thing I might moisturize my face with once or twice a week would be jojoba oil, which is still in its natural state and closest to the skin's pH, and with a little bit of pure rose essential oil. And that's both my perfume and my moisturizer once or twice a week, and that's my entire beauty routine.
Yeah, it's one recurring kind of sentence I hear about this topic is basically don't put anything on your skin that you wouldn't be comfortable ingesting.
Yeah, that's right.
And so you don't think there's any good brands for for like lipstick, for example. There isn't, like, no one's figured out like a biodynamic, organic way of doing it safely. This just doesn't exist.
You have to use the pigments mined from the earth. So unless the only way to go about that is if they actually tested every batch and did it food grade. I don't know anyone that does that. They'd have to get a food grade tinted, the natural colours from the earth, etc. Or if they're using things like turmeric, etc., fair enough, although turmeric is often high in lead. That's another story. But they'd need to use a ingredient where they actually filtered out the toxic impurities with every batch they mined. I don't know anyone who does that. There may be out there. I've never looked, but the ones that I preliminarily looked at, they don't do it. It's too expensive. Yeah. So I say don't use tinted lipstick. I might use jojoba oil again just on my lips. You know what I mean? If I feel it's dry. And if it's dry, as a naturopath, I'd be going, well, are you drinking enough water? Is this a problem with your digestive system? Let's look at the cause of it rather than just put a Band-Aid on top.
It's interesting, this topic, because it's it's such a massive industry and a lot of people pouring their hard-earned money into things that are actually detrimental for them in the long run. It's kind of sad to see. What do you think of more like not the makeup area, but like just general skincare and deodorant type stuff? Because I can't remember the brand. There's one Australian brand that I have, and then another one is just the Dr. Bronner's, like I think it's lavender and coconut or something. It's supposed, it's quote unquote organic. I assume it's decent, but what's the kind of, what should I understand about that? What should men or women be using for general skincare?
Well, as I said, I say nothing. That's
okay.
I would say, why are we using skincare? Full stop. I don't think we should be using anything. Unless it's in its natural state. So in my age, given I'm postmenopausal, I use a lot more oils, mainly jojoba oil, coconut oil. As I said, I use to remove my mascara, and then I'll just use sweet almond oil on the body. That's about it. That's my entire routine. So I know women don't like to hear that because we all believe the BS, even though we know it's not true, that, using these products reduce wrinkles, etc. Well, I'm sure most of us know that's just BS. And we really need to go, well, less sun exposure on the face if you actually want to wrinkle less, because, of course, that can make a profound impact on wrinkles and things. But good diet, drink a lot more filtered water is critical for beauty care. Make sure you've got enough fibre in your diet, that you're defecating at least once or twice a day. If you get that right, you will look great. If you are happy, you will project happiness and people will be attracted to you. All this stuff about how we look is really driving this multi-trillion-dollar industry, which is increasing their toxic load.
And it's introducing all these toxins into the environment as well, because they get washed off people's faces, and then where do they go? Or they get wiped off, and where does that go? It goes in the landfill. It's just the problem keeps spreading. What do you think of I forgot the person's name, but they made kind of like animal product based. I think it was like, using tallow and things like that. And some of them even use, like, I think goat milk I've even seen. Do you rate those at all? I think they're like soaps.
Yeah, I think that'd be good. But the thing is, because of the toxic load and pesticide load on the farms, that it's accumulating in the fat of the animal.
True. Assuming it was organic then, or
But biodynamic is your best. If you're going to get into biodynamic food, and biodynamic makeup is your best option. And that's certified through Demeter, certainly in Australia, I don't know in New Zealand.
It is as well. We have a Demeter.
Yeah. That is your best option because they really are looking at strictly non-pesticide use, whereas a lot of the organic farms in Australia use copper sulfate pentahydrate, and I'm finding more people who are eating organic food, high levels of copper and zinc deficiency. That's just anecdotally. So, the organic farms still have to use pesticides, just not a chemical pesticide, it's a metal. And I don't think that's great either, to be honest. So we need to start thinking more broadly about, with these animal fats. I think animal fats are a critical, important part of the human diet. And if you can get biodynamic meat, then awesome, because the fats is where all the toxicants and pesticides and flame retardants and etc. are accumulating. So putting that on your face is fine, providing it's been certified biodynamic if you can.
Yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, like you're mentioning with I think it's ACO, Australian Certified Organic, the organic standards that people, I don't think they often understand, they misunderstand that like organic means totally different, not totally different, but quite different things in different countries around the world. The standards are set usually within a country, and sometimes within a country there's multiple standards.
Yeah.
And some of them all match IFOAM, the international one, but I don't think Australian one does. I think USDA and Australian Organic isn't part of IFOAM. Don't quote me on that, but yeah, the standards are different depending on the country, and so people assume it's all good, but it's not necessarily the case. But biodynamic is a lot stricter.
Yes, exactly right. So you want beef, what's I going to say? Oh my gosh. Like the thing that I cook with is ghee. Ghee is so important. Oh my gosh. You don't want to fry, or olive oil is an amazing food, especially organic BD, but you'd never want to cook it, which most people do, and then it becomes a terrible product. So, ghee, like what they do for billions of people in India, is an amazing thing. And you want that organic. I think little things like that can make a profound difference to your health long term.
Yeah. And what do you think? Because I know a beekeeper, and they like to use, I think there's a bee product type things for, I think, skincare. Like there's beeswax products. Assuming that was of high quality, you think that's good?
Yeah, absolutely. Still in its natural state. Fantastic. Definitely.
Cool. Well, I mean, I think they do have to heat it up to melt it, and then I don't know if they add anything else to it, but yeah, it is definitely more of a natural.
Cold pressed and things like that, ideal. But yeah, certainly there's a lot of Manuka honeys and things that have high, I don't know what value they refer to, but have amazing wound healing effects and things like that. Definitely natural product.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, next part of this sort of interview podcast, I was thinking we could go through not the nitty-gritty numbers, but just the overall building biology evaluation guidelines, SBM 2015, and just talk about a little bit about each of the points. Some of them we've already covered, but I think it's interesting for people to I've never seen it in any other podcast before, like just all of these briefly covered in one clip. So I think that'd be good. And if there's listeners that want to maybe get slightly more out of this section, you can just Google Building Biology Evaluation Guidelines 2015, and you can see the PDF that we're gonna go through.
Sure. Okay. Probably should get that up on my screen. Well, the building biology began in the 70s in Germany as a result of the oil embargo that resulted in sick building syndrome in commercial buildings. So as a result of that, they started to look at how buildings could impact human health, and the Germans developed the whole issue of building biology. So they've got a set of guidelines related to this. They're excellent in relation to electromagnetic fields, but not good in other hazards, I have to say, which is why we don't use the other ones in the building biology course, because there's better when it comes to chemical exposures and particulate exposures and mold. That other countries are doing a lot better. But for EMFs, the building biologists do it really, really well. So depending on the field, you've got AC electric fields, AC magnetic fields, and radio frequencies. AC electric fields, really, I don't really go into detail unless someone's electrically sensitive, because there's not a lot of data on the impact of electric fields on human health. We've had electrification of the world for over 2 centuries now, and there's very little data on its impact. What is concerning me down the track with electric fields, however, is that we've got more and more smart appliances coming into our homes, and these are creating high levels of dirty electricity, which appear to be riding on the electric field. So that's when it becomes more of an issue, but that's, just watch that space. The data in the scientific literature is saying that AC magnetic fields in 2002 was classified as a possible carcinogen to humans by the World Health Organization, and that was following the research by Wertheim and Leeper and Album and Greenland on exposures to electromagnetic fields from high voltage transmission lines. So that is a concern. We don't want to be spending time near magnetic fields. And I'd say in a living space, you don't want to be exposed to more than anything above 2 milligauss. And in a bedroom, the Germans would say you don't want to be exposed to anything above 0.2 milligauss, which means you can't have any appliances that draw current near your bed. They would include being on the other side of the wall of a fridge or a meter panel or a solar inverter or a pool pump or a digital clock radio within 30 centimetres of your head or electric blanket. All of those emit high magnetic fields when you're in close proximity. So that's why I say in your bedroom, where you spend 22 years of your life, you don't want any appliances or wireless devices there.
Yeah, with the electric fields, I think I pretty much agree with what you're saying, that it's like, it is, of the problems we're dealing with, it is definitely lower priority. It's not, they usually with distance, they pretty much go close to zero. But the one point that I've told people is sometimes the outlets, we plug things in, sometimes they're beside a bed, and if they're turned off, I think it's mostly fine. I think there's obviously still stuff happening behind the wall, but when people leave them on, then within about 30 centimeters there is an electric field. So people should try to turn them off if they're around the bed, right?
Well, the problem is that the wiring in the wall will also emit up to 1.2 meters. So the wiring emits 1.2 meters from a 240-volt source. So you're going to find the electric field will come in 1.2 meters in your room, wherever the wiring on the walls, let alone power points. It's not just the power points. So, but I would argue that's not a problem for human health. The only time I'm finding it's a problem is if you're electrically sensitive or there's a high lot of smart appliances in your home creating lots of dirty power that's riding on that field. So that's where a demand switch is useful in your meter panels, that you can switch down the electricity to that part of the house, like your bedroom, so you're not exposed to the electric field at all.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then you covered AC magnetic fields. Radio frequency radiation, that's the one that I harp on the most about on Instagram and things. It's obviously the most, one of the most dangerous, and it's increasing the most and causing the most problems. I guess just the main things there are Wi-Fi, smart meters, smart devices, smart appliances, using the phone intelligently, etc.
Absolutely. So RF, all your wireless devices, as you mentioned, you don't want to be exposed to anything above 10 microwatts per square meter, which is becoming very difficult to do. I would say in a healthy person, they probably will tolerate up to 100 microwatts per square meter in their environment, because there are many apartments in the city that you're not going to get below 100. It's pretty difficult because you're at the mercy of everyone beside you. I mean, this is why people who do the building biology course, they can no longer live in a multi-story apartment because they can't control their environment. They've got routers all around them in other apartments, below, above, to the side. You've got lifts. You've got water damage. Someone's bath has leaked above and now it's affecting you with biotoxins. It's like, this is why, many of the students end up moving out, where they are in environments where they've got land around them and they can control their immediate environment. But yes, the power density or exposure standard for radio frequencies is you want to keep it below 10 if you can. If you're relatively healthy, I'd say try and keep it below 100 if you can. But that will mean that you can't have wireless devices like routers and things like that in the house, because they'll emit thousands of microwatts per square meter. When you're hotspotting, which I have to do from time to time when I'm in hotels, it means I'm going to be exposed to thousands of microwatts. But of course, when I'm sleeping, which is the most important time, I'm shutting it all down so I can have a sleep as well as possible, then I'm not suppressing melatonin.
Yeah. I've got two questions on wireless radiation, radio frequency radiation, just from people that have asked me, and I haven't been able to give them a great answer. One of them was, when you look on your phone or your laptop and you see, well, not where I live, but where I was in Australia, it was the case. And, and if you go into a city, it's the case. You look and there's 15, 20, maybe 30, maybe even more different Wi-Fi signals that you're within range of. Someone on the internet posted that is actually not necessarily an accurate depiction of what you're being exposed to just because you can see it there. But I was saying that no, if you can see it on the list, then you're within its field, and it is. I mean, the further away you are, the less you're getting affected. But you are getting affected at some level if you can see it on your phone, right? Because it's obviously there.
Well, we can't pick that up in terms of power output. So I will be in a home where they can pick it up on their phone, the signal,
Mm-hmm.
but the power density is 0 or low. So because the only exposure standard we have for RF is based on power density, then, even you're right, we're being exposed on some level, but it's not through
Yeah.
the power density. So we don't know, A, if that's a problem for human health, and B, how to measure that apart from looking on your phone to go, oh, you can see the neighbours have got their router on, etc. Because when I come in with my equipment to measure power density, it's often 0. So it's not, I can't compare it to the building biology standards of microwatts per
Is
square
it
metre because it's not even picked up.
Is it a case of if you had like even more and more and more expensive meters that are even, can detect at even lower and lower and lower levels, then you would pick up the difference between, having that 5 signals on your phone that are popping up versus one. Is that a component of it, the level of meter and how low it can
Our
detect?
meters, you're talking about 4,000 for the meter. It's the best meter in the world. It picks up microwatt per square meter to half a microwatt per square meter. So it's highly sensitive. Yeah, but it won't pick up the power. The power density coming from these sources is not significant, which means, do we need another exposure standard for something that could be affecting our biology? But this is not the way it's to do it, through power density.
Okay,
It might be
so a
a
different
mechanism.
measuring system.
Yes. We
Okay,
don't know.
and
We don't know.
yeah, and that's a good point. That's a good way to sort of answer it, because it's sort of it's more complicated than I thought. It wasn't like you can't measure it from power density. The other point I wanted to ask was, how do you relate these numbers to? It's very difficult, but how do you relate these numbers? Say, your Wi-Fi router, you're going into someone's home and you measure for them that it's at 5 meters away, it's 10 milliwatts per meter squared, or I'm not sure what the microwatt equivalent would be, but you say you get that measurement. How do you emphasize to them that that's bad or not so bad? How do you relate that to something an ordinary person who's never heard of EMF can understand?
Well, we just say, generally, we just say, okay, this is within the building biology guidelines. This is fine to spend time in this space, or this is not. This is very high. More importantly, where's the source coming from? That's really what we're doing in an EMF assessment, is going, where is the source coming from? Is it internal? Is it external? And how can we reduce the client's exposure to that? And educate them. And often it's educating them, okay, well, if the router's here and you're sleeping there, this could be impacting your sleep. So if you can't relocate it or don't want to, then you need to at least turn it off. And if you can't be bothered turning off, then get a timer, like what you use for your lights when you go on holidays. Get a timer so it turns it off automatically, so you don't have to think about it, at 10 o'clock at night. A lot of what we do as building biologists is actually educate people, because they're often bringing in the problem and they're not aware of that. Or it's their use, it's the way they're using it that becomes the issue, as opposed to the device, blaming a smart meter, blaming a high voltage transmission line or whatever. It's like with electromagnetic fields, the closer it is to your person, the higher the exposure level. So you have to start with your cell phone, then your digital devices, then you move away from that, from your bedroom to your digital clock radios where you're spending time, and then your computer, before you even go outside and blame some power company for something. Do you know what I mean? People don't always want to do that, because what they don't realise is they've consciously brought that product into their home because of the convenience, but that can come at a cost.
Yeah. Yeah, it's better just, people, I think, like, with a lot of the kind of, I mean, they're doing their best, but like the 5G, obviously I think 5G is terrible and we should stop that. We should probably go back to just 3G temporarily and figure out what we're going to do with this whole international system we've got going. But the people who are really, part of that group of people that protest 5G and things, I think a lot of them They just don't know, but that they, there's a lot of things you can do internally in your own home to address and improve your situation. It's not all just about, what the power companies are doing outside your home, as you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And then next on the list, number 4 and 5, we got static electric and static magnetic fields. That's the DC E field and DC magnetic field. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. So that's more like what you find in MRIs, for example, in hospitals. You can find from geopathic stress. That can happen sometimes. But, they would be more like sacred spaces and things like that from the Aboriginals in those areas that have an understanding of that. Yeah. It's not unless.
And also, is anything with a battery, like a battery operated wristwatch, that's a DC magnetic field? Is that correct?
Look, does that cause problems? I've never seen any data on it, and I don't know people who react to that. So I would say not to my knowledge.
Yeah, I've met someone who's EHS who decides not to use one of those sorts of watches because they think it might affect them. But yeah, I don't think I've seen any study on it. But there are just the wind up mechanical watches. So
battery operated wind up, I think definitely the way to go if you're EHS. But in terms of I'm not talking Fitbits that have RF components and all that stuff.
Yeah, that's terrible, obviously. Yeah.
There's no way they'd cope with that.
And next on the list is radioactivity. So this is what you were saying before with the Geiger counters?
Yes. So radioactivity depends where you live as to where there's high the mineral content and the geology of the minerals in the land that you're living above could impact human health. And the most famous example of that is radon. Radon gas actually is the second most common cause of lung cancer in the world, and it exists because if you're living above a radioactive deposit that's high in uranium, it breaks down into different isotopes, and eventually you inhale it as radon gas, which turns into lead in the body and causes lung cancer. So I know in many parts of America they have to do real estate transactions where they're not allowed to sell their house until they get a radon gas test. And if it's above the US exposure standard, they can't sell it.
Is, say, Chernobyl or what happened in Japan, would, after those sorts of events or, possibly even continuing today, I'm not sure, is that the sort of thing that would be picked up in a building biology test? Oh, you've got contamination from this, reactor that blew up recently.
Yeah, it's not something we do very common at all because we're generally doing assessments in our area where we know it really well. So I don't know any building biologists that have done actively that. But if they were asked to do it, they could certainly do it for sure. Our PANSA certainly do that. That's our Nuclear Safety Authority where they go and do assessments for ionising radiation. I don't know any building biologists that have ever been asked to do that because you can just look on the radon map and the radiometric map to get an idea of what the exposure is likely to be based on our PANSA's assessment of the continent.
Yeah, and also from what I understand, it's because both those events, there've probably been others, but they happened in the Northern Hemisphere. So due to the way the wind and all that flows, it's most of it settled around the Northern Hemisphere. I'm not sure how accurate that is. Next is the number 7, geological disturbances. We talked a little bit about this at the start. This is the natural problems caused by a natural magnetic field from the Earth.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
They've also got disturbance of terrestrial radiation. What would be an example of that? Is that cosmic or
cosmic flares, solar flares? Okay. Cosmic radiation exists as a result of the when planets in the galaxy explode and they emit high levels of cosmic radiation, which is more toxic to biological life than even nuclear bombs, etc., and gamma radiation. People who are most susceptible are those who fly, especially international flights, like your stewardesses. They have much higher rates of infertility and as a result of their exposures to cosmic radiation. I had one of my students many years ago when he signed up to become a flight steward, he had to say that within 2 years of flying, he would no longer ever donate his organs because of the damage from flying.
Far out. Is that due to the sort of air that gets obviously cleaned and circulated within the cabin on the plane, or is it to do with, how do they actually? What's the interaction that happens for them to absorb these unhealthy particles? Or
Cosmic radiation from the galaxy. The higher you fly up in the ionosphere, the higher the level of cosmic rays coming through and penetrating into the plane. Yep.
okay, so it just goes straight into the plane.
Yep.
Oh wow.
So that's why our ionosphere is so important, this protective layer around the Earth, because without that, we'd be dead. There'd be no bacteria wouldn't grow. That cosmic radiation is extremely toxic to life. So without that, that's why they thought Mars eventually disintegrated, because the ionosphere disappeared, and of course the cosmic radiation kills everything on the planet. So the higher you fly, above 30,000 feet, the higher the exposure to cosmic radiation. And that causes DNA fragmentation and increased risks of cancers and other things like that. So, yeah.
Interesting. Thank you for that. The next one is sound waves. So they say here that there's currently no guideline values, and it's probably difficult to test. But what would your assessment of sound waves or sound pollution be for a home?
We don't do sound pollution. It's very technical to do sound because of the way in which sound can interact and reflect and refract off various surfaces. So we're not sound technicians. We don't measure that. I just simply ask, in terms of hazards in the home, is noise a problem for you? Can you hear background noise? And of course, that would be it. Because measuring sound is incredibly technical. It's a lot of physics involved, and it's not something we learn in the course, and it's not something that's generally raised, because if it is a problem, they already know it. They're not going to pay.
Yeah. And I think just the building materials, if you're new build, would be where you could take that into consideration. Just build, obviously I think it might be too hot in Australia, but double glazing does stop some of the sound, right? And
yeah, absolutely.
Cool. And then there's light. So light pollution. Again, is that just something you explain? Getting the blinds, blackout curtains.
Yeah, it'd be more things like blue light, so LEDs, which type of lighting to have inside the home to reduce your exposure to blue light. Digital devices, blue light filters, blue light blocking glasses, all those sort of things.
And do you recommend the red bulbs? Because I got some of those from a company in Australia.
Yeah, absolutely, but not during the day, because you want blue light during the day to set your circadian rhythm. People buy this stuff and then they think they have to do it all the time. In fact, they're stuffing up the circadian rhythm. It's only after dark when the sun sets that you actually want that glow as opposed to that blue light. So during the day, they need that blue light to entrain their circadian rhythm in a positive way.
Yeah. And then section B, indoor toxins, pollutants, formaldehyde. So what's the main source of that in a home?
Imported soft furnishings, imported blankets, imported Manchester. Formaldehyde is used as an anti-crease agent.
Okay.
And basically a lot of the Asian countries, even though they're not allowed to have it in their country, they'll, douse their soft furnishings and things to prevent it wrinkling when it's on the boat. So you often have high levels of formaldehyde, which can be a real problem for people with sensitivities.
Okay, and does that just, like you were talking about paint before, has that got a time frame where it off gases or that goes away, or is it present forever?
Well, it takes a long time to outgas because it's a semi-volatile, but it can be a real nuisance because it's an eye, skin and lung irritant. It causes quite significant reactions. So it's something that you don't want in the house. And that's why I say when it comes to soft furnishings and buy things that are manufactured in Australia, because Australian manufacturers are not allowed to have that in there. It's a carcinogen. It causes cancer, throat cancer. So you want to make sure that you buy Australian made. If you do buy sheets and things from overseas, as I did recently, I would wash it in very hot water and dry it in the sun. Before I
sunlight's good for cleaning lots of things.
Yeah.
And then there's solvents next, VOCs. We sort of covered that already. So many different sources of that. Then there's pesticides. I guess the main way they would get in the home would be off people's shoes. Just walking in.
Living near farms, living near a golf course can significantly increase your toxic load, like huge, even within 2 Ks. That's a real problem. High levels. I had a naturopath who was so healthy. She lived within just across the road from a golf course, and her levels of pesticide glyphosate were off the chart. Off the chart. She did everything to help her health, and then just realised that where she lived across the road from a golf course was a disaster for her health.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I think there are some golf courses that use organic, quote unquote, organic fertilizer and stuff, but I don't know if what they're using for to weed control. It's probably the minority as well.
Yeah, I don't know.
And then you've got here, there's plasticizers. What's that?
Plasticizers. So they're used in your plastic products to make them more flexible. They're phthalates. They're hormone-disrupting chemicals like phthalates, and there are many different types of phthalates like bisphenol A, diethylhexyl phthalate, benzoyl phthalate. They're designed to make plastics flexible because plastics are inherently very brittle. So they add chemicals or plasticizers to them to make them flexible. Now, these may contain hormone-disrupting chemicals, which can be not good for children who are going through these hormone developments, and they should be avoided. PVC is one of the worst, polyvinyl chloride. You do not want vinyl in your house at all. It's incredibly toxic and should never be used because you can have significant levels of phthalates in your household dust when you have vinyl.
Okay, and does that so for example, PVC pipes, they're the ones that plumbers and stuff use. I sometimes use one of those for self-massage, like in place of a foam roller. But so you're saying that even without the heat, or is it just giving off these unhealthy compounds as it is, just neutral situation, or does it need to be rubbed on your skin or heated up, or how does it get off and into the air?
Well, yeah, so it'd be with vinyl, it's just the wear and tear and the heat. The hotter a plastic becomes, the more it outgasses, and then it sticks to the dust. So how you do it, if it's vinyl flooring, I'd say remove it immediately. It's really toxic. If it's something like PVC pipe, well, most of the PVC pipe in Australia is used for sewage. So it's not such an issue. It's more a problem for the environment and marine wildlife, which is a big problem, but not so much human health. If it's PVC in your drinking water pipes, yeah, that'd be a problem because it will leach. The hotter the pipe becomes, it leaches these phthalates. If you're storing
Summer, yeah.
your food and leftovers in PVC containers, your number threes, then that's a problem. Or polystyrene is another plastic that has hormone disrupting chemicals. Then you don't want to store or heat food in plastic in a freezer or heat it in microwave because it will leach more of these phthalates.
Yeah, it's such a complicated issue, the how to transport and manage food storage. I've been on a search and haven't found a solution yet. Maybe you have, for like what can you, because for wrapping meat, say from a home kill, or if you're getting it straight from the butcher and you want to store it in the freezer, I know that some people in Canada use and the US use butcher's paper, but some of them contain like probably waxes with dodgy ingredients in those. Have you found any material that's ideal, or is it just glass and ceramic that you have to go for?
Glass, ceramic, Corningware is best. Stainless steel is also okay for drinking water bottles if it's food grade. There's a lot of stuff that you can use that is good, but if you're storing meats and you're buying it, you get to your local butcher, so they're not wrapping it always in this plastic, and get it just put in butcher's paper that's not treated, or bring your own for them to put it in once they've weighed it.
Okay, untreated butcher's paper.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've seen people do that with the glass containers. Okay, and then there's heavy metals. So this is probably more self-explanatory, just straight up contamination like mercury and things like that from if one of those bulbs breaks.
Yeah, if the bulb breaks, yep. Obviously, fish will be a major source for a lot of the toxic metals and occupations, of course.
Right, and then there's particles and fibers. Yeah, obviously, yeah.
Yeah.
Pardon? Say that again.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Diet and food, fish, herbs and spices can be high, especially turmeric can be high in lead because they often add lead dust to make it weigh more to get more money for it. That's a big problem. Lead paint is a big one. That's the major source of lead, especially if people are renovating. But like asbestos, it has to be disturbed for it to be a respiratory or a health issue.
Okay. And particles and fibers, is that the sort of dust thing you see when you shake
Yeah.
a pillow or something indoors
Yeah,
and
so
the light's shining
dust
through it?
particles generally, it's not something we would generally test because you'd have to not be able to see in front of you to even pick up those dust particles on our counters, so that it's useless. When you grill or fry or cook, you emit high levels of ultrafines, but that quickly dissipates with good ventilation. So the big ones will be traffic-related air pollutants and things like idling your car in a garage and those particles coming in through the house, or any construction nearby or mining nearby. They're going to be your big sources of particles.
Right. Okay. Then there's indoor climate. I think what do you really have to say for that one? It's just keeping it not too hot, right?
What do you mean indoor climate?
It's on the list, number 6. It just says indoor climate, temperature, humidity, carbon dioxide, air ions, air changes, odors.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so, yeah, indoor air. So your humidity, that's more mould. So making sure humidity isn't such it's not above 70% for more than a couple of days, otherwise you'll get microbial issues. Carbon dioxide is generally what you breathe out, so making sure you've got good ventilation in the house. Air ions is normally what you find in nature where there's movement of water, so the more negative air ions, the better. So, yeah, they're the main ones. Indoor air quality is normally something I'm looking at when I'm doing mould assessments.
Yeah. And then the last section, C, is fungi, bacteria, allergens. We already covered mold. Yeast is on here. How does that get into the home in a negative way?
We don't measure yeasts. No, yeast is a type of mold. It's the actual mold spores, especially pathogenic fungi like Aspergillus, Penicillium, Cladosporium, Chaetomium, Fusarium. They're the main ones that you'll find in a water-damaged environment. So we will do a thorough site inspection, exposure history, and then do a visual inspection for visible mold and damp odour. Then we would set up a sampling strategy to measure biotoxins in the air and the surface and send them to the lab to be analysed to see if we find any of these pathogenic fungi that can cause serious health issues. The Germans, in fact, when it comes to mold in building biology, they don't do it very well at all, and those exposure stands I completely ignore. However, the US is really onto this, and that's where we get most of our training, the guidelines from the IICRC as to how we remediate a water damaged building. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that's the standards. Wrapping it up in the sort of soonish, what do you think of, because a lot of homes, they already exist and they've got these problems in them. It could cost a lot of money to just buy a home and then have to make it a healthy home. What do you suggest to people? It seems like building new is better, but then there's obviously a lot more costs involved with that. Is there such a thing as a building biology tiny home, that might be more affordable or something like that?
Well, I have in my book, Healthy Home, Healthy Family, I have a pre-inspection checklist. So if you follow that checklist, you should be able to find a relatively healthy home. And if there is when you do that site inspection, it'll give you a marker. Okay, that looks like that's not good. So you get a building biologist in to test it. There are pros and cons to every house. New houses have high levels of VOCs. And if they're 6-star or more energy rated, they're going to end up being a mold box within 2 years. So I would definitely stay clear of new homes unless you had the money to get a proper, not a volume builder, but a proper builder to actually put the time, money into building a home that complies with all of these basic standards. We offer consulting, so different packages for people who are building, where we talk and liaise with their draftsman or architect or with the client on, once they've got a floor plan, what type of materials to use, what type of sealants and paints to use, and what type of cross ventilation is needed in order to maximise that as a healthy home. And a lot of the time we're going, don't do triple glazing, etc. That's going to create a mold box because the condensation can't move through unless you have intelligent wraps in the wall. So we do offer that as part of our packages that we offer through my website, buildingbiology.com.au. But myself, I live in an 80s building. I replaced all the windows with 6mm glass and louvers. I have louvers throughout my whole house, and I'm in Melbourne. I love it because, when it's a hot day and then it cools in the evening, I literally open my windows and within 2 minutes the house is cooling down quickly. I have good cross ventilation. I'm in a bushy area. I've got natural light in every room. Yeah, it's built in the 80s and there were a bit of water issues which we've addressed since. But it's, floorboards throughout because my daughter has dust mite sensitivities. And it's a healthy home. It's a little home, but it's healthy and I absolutely love it.
Yeah.
So
I like what you said there. It's good that it's it's not it's not necessarily as bad as you need to. All the homes have lots of problems. You can find relatively safe ones. I guess an advantage of the new home thing. Another one would be you could choose a location. If you did your research on where a cell tower is or isn't going to be popping up in the next 5 years or something, maybe that's another advantage to the new build option.
Absolutely, yeah. So certainly in Australia, for my book, I've got all those websites, what to look at before you build, where the councils are proposing these towers, etc., and antennas. So you've got a good understanding of what's around the proximity of the building. But the big part of it, of course, is what you bring in, where most of that exposure happens from your behaviour, and you may not be aware of that.
Yeah, like you mentioned, just things such as simple as just not wearing shoes indoors. I mean, there's so many things you can start doing. Same with EMF. The day you learn about it, really easy, cheap, free things you can do to reduce your exposure to these problems. Because I think people going to petrol stations and then wearing those shoes indoors, and
Yes,
this is how it all spreads everywhere.
absolutely. And that's where the child and the baby who's crawling through it has the high risk of exposure. Yep. Cool.
Yeah. And then lastly, so you've actually set up a school to teach this. That's probably maybe a topic for another podcast. But you've set up a whole school to help increase the number of people like you who can do these tests. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. So I run the Australian College of Environmental Studies. I founded that in 1999. It's now a nationally accredited course, an advanced diploma of building biology. It's 18 months full-time, 4 years part-time, 7 subjects online. You can start any time. They're 12 weeks in duration. Should set aside around 10 hours a week in homework. We have 4 subjects on campus. That involves 2 one-week workshops in Melbourne. One of the on-campus subjects is mold testing, which we will be running in New Zealand, either in the second half of this year or next year. We have quite a few people from New Zealand coming to us and training in mold testing. It's a 4-day course followed by 12 weeks of online training. So definitely looking at starting to set up our roots in New Zealand in the next 12 months to offer the building biology training there, starting with the mold testing course.
And are you seeing, I presume there's a increase in demand? Is it for these services that in the last few years, or has it been increasing steadily since you started?
No, the last few years, since the parliamentary inquiry into biotoxin illness and mould 2 years ago in Australia, that's accelerated. I've spent the last 5 years educating doctors how to diagnose environmental sensitivities, and that is where most of our referrals come from now. So a lot of building biologists hit the ground running. We don't have enough building biologists to do the work. We're currently liaising with one of the largest integrated medical associations, and they want every one of their GPs to refer us to a building biologist, but I don't have enough. I hardly have any at the ground level, maybe 30. Wow. It's ridiculous. So the demand is there. We just don't have enough people to do the work. So hopefully that'll change with time because it's quite ironic.
And so
especially New
Yeah, I think it
Zealand.
will. And so did you just mentioned the GPs are on board with this? They want to get, collaborate. Is that correct?
Yes, integrative GPs. So GPs who specialise in nutrition and natural therapies through the Australasian Integrated Medical Association, and they're referring a lot of work to us because they're realising patients with chronic fatigue syndrome, many of them are in mould-affected buildings, so they're getting the building biologist to assess it, but we just don't have enough people to do the work. So especially in New Zealand, I've gone to and spoken at medical conferences a couple of times in New Zealand, and I've said, sorry guys, got no one here, and yet they're all busting to refer people. I've got one person coming through at the moment, but they've just started the course, so it could be another 2-3 years away. So much work over in New Zealand, it's incredible.
Oh, it's interesting. Yeah, and it's a difficult thing because I guess you need someone, unless they're going to travel all around, and take flights, which is going to bump up the cost for the consumer, you kind of need someone, people spread out, not just all in Melbourne or all in Brisbane, Auckland, etc.
Yes, it'd be handy to have them in each of your capital cities as well. But the work is definitely there. We just need the consultants to come through the course to do it. And then we could refer them to a lot of work.
Awesome. Well, it's been a really informative episode, Nicole. Do you have any closing remarks for the audience? Get find my work here. Find more information here. You've got your book, which has got a lot of good information, and maybe anything you've got extra to say to the audience.
Sure. There's a lot of videos and information on my personal website, buildingbiology.com.au. There's also, and that's really geared for the public. The book has got a lot of information on the scientific impact on electromagnetic fields, mold, and chemicals on human health, and more importantly, simple tips on how to reduce your family's exposure. You can get that through the book depository online. That's free postage. It's just a matter of being informed and really thinking twice. Just because it's on the supermarket shelf doesn't mean it's been tested. So really think twice about what you bring into your house, what you put into your mouth, and what you put on your body, because most of those toxicants have never been tested, and that's why it's important to be informed with podcasts like this.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Nicole.
You're very welcome.
Okay, so that was Nicole. I'm really grateful I was able to interview her. She's a wealth of knowledge. I like how she emphasized biodynamic food, which, if you have access to, then great. And also her positive attitude for, giving people actionable tips, things they can do to improve their situation, because there are a lot of hazards out there and people can't move often immediately or as soon as they'd like. And so you do need to stay positive while you're working through whatever home environmental issue you're dealing with. And I hope that this podcast and others like it can increase the demand for her services, increase the demand for building biologists, increase interest in it so that it can become a mainstream industry and more accessible to more people. You can check out Nicole's work at buildingbiology.com.au, also on the Australian College of Environmental Studies. They have a website as well. Her book is available on bookdepository.com.au. As I said in the introduction, I own a copy of it. It's really good. It's a full-on, really easy to understand, full guide of pretty much all the things that you could need to know, and there's heaps of references in it as well, and other websites and other resources she recommends at the end of the book. So it's definitely worth buying. I would like to hear more about the positive and negative geological influences, geopathic stress she was talking about. I'd like to hear more about that and the potential for maybe positive locations, negative locations. And if you're interested in an EMF meter to start measuring, that component of your home or workplace, the one I recommend at this point in time is the Cornet ED88T Plus. and I'll leave a link and a discount code in the description of this video if you want to use that to get an EMF meter. You can also find more of my work at growsanctuary.com. There's a resources page which has products and organizations that I recommend, as well as Instagram at Grow Sanctuary, YouTube, and BitChute. I've got videos on there, Grow Sanctuary. And yeah, in conclusion, I think that this topic of building biology is very, very, very underrated in the health community, natural health community, whatever you want to call it. And it's unfortunate, you've got people pushing, promoting products like nootropics, health tracking devices, PEMF devices, all these gadgets, and those sorts of products do have a place in an approach to getting people healthy and interested in their health, but they're not foundational compared to something like the healthy home, building biology. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think it's just maybe the people, these health gurus, they just don't know about it, or maybe they don't promote, or they don't really talk about building biology as much because there's no affiliate marketing money involved. It's not like promoting a supplement where you can get an affiliate link for an affiliate code or whatever. Building biology, talking about that's just sharing information, good information for people. Maybe that's just me being skeptical. But anyway, thank you for listening, and I hope you got some value from that podcast.